recording, doesn't seem to be saving in my folder because I was looking for my notes to send you from yesterday and I was like, where's our recording? So I have to look for that because for some reason it's not in my Zoom folder. So even though it said it was recording like this, I don't know. So I just want to make sure we're absolutely recording this. So yeah. So any in particular, just which intro would you like me to use?
Give them to me.
Yeah, which intro how do you want me to introduce you?
This is Andrea Leigh, speaker, author, coach.
Okay. You don't want to give me any, I don't want it. You want me to say anything more than that? And that you
Not
introduce
really.
yourself? Okay, cool. Yeah, because sometimes I'm like, people have their little bio and
And what I would do is just say, I mean, if you wanted to say, Andrea, I mean, go into that a little deeper. And I'd say, you know what, man, I have had a great story. I just, I was in the fashion and I can say whatever you want.
Okay, good. All right, perfect. So I'll just say, because I'll just do this differently. I'll just say, listen, I usually have a bio that I read out, but I'm going to let Andrea, introduce herself just like that.
Okay.
Something like
And
that.
I usually touch on my transition, but it's not a big deal. I usually just say, this is what I did. I did all these life experiences. And in the middle of that, I changed from a Harley riding, cattle ranching girl to a rock star female fashionista. Who'd have thunk?
Right.
And then,
okay, good. All right.
And
perfect.
that's how I do it.
And then, just as we're looking through this, like, continuation of what we talked about yesterday, which is so cool, when we have this conversation of grit and determination and the story as it relates to you, because we want to make sure that we're able to use bites of this interview for everything. Is there anything in particular that you want to focus on as far as the suffering to the success part of the story?
It's really interesting because I was reading what I'm going to do for the High Impact Summit. And what I talk about is that what's really interesting to me is when people say, was there a turning point for you? And it's like, the turning point for me was getting really hurt training for a triathlon. And up until that point, training was a pain in the ass. It wasn't the funnest, but when it was something that was such a huge goal of mine that when I recovered and was able to get back to training was easy compared to the pain I had endured. And so,
let's use that as a metaphor. I love that. I love that. Let's hold that thought. Hold this thought. I want you to tell me it live. And then I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's it. Let's just go.
The big points. Yes. Here's the big points for me are experience.
Yeah.
Is that the meaning and purpose of life is found in the experience. People are not thinking about us. And so much of what limits us is what people think about us. And they simply are not.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that the limitations, I've had people tell me, well, you've had fairly easy life. And it's like, I'm not sure if I had my life easy. I've just recognized that the limitations aren't outside of ourselves. The limitations are in our minds.
100%. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just remembering what I told you about the hope, because I have it too, that positivity, what's really important for us to be relatable and for people to hire us is to recognize that that difficulties and challenges happen and pain happens, but it's also that you're in charge of the lens to which you see it, or something like that. You know what I mean?
I do see
people
that.
To understand.
Yes. And what that is things happen, and it is the main crux of what you learn when things happen to you. Bad things happen. It's your response to what happens is the most important thing. That's where you learn. And you're not learning your lessons from the struggles you have in life until you learn how to respond to them differently.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. Yep. All right. That's awesome. And then what we'll do is we'll tap into, because I'll say, because I know this to be true, that you're helping people, guiding people through that as a speaker and a coach and a consultant. And you have a few, themes that you mentioned, or pillars per se. And one of them is the importance of discernment. So you hear that, how we talked about that yesterday?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Any other word that is your word of the day for today, as far as the motivation and drive for
No, and I think when it comes to discernment, I think I would use I think I might use, I don't think I'll go with the specific, but I think the discernment, what I'll use there is, and I won't get into it so we can do it live, but I think the discernment and the disappointment one can have in people is when they don't live up to who you think they are or what you want other people to be. Sometimes that's a lack of discernment in us and has nothing to do with the other person.
Mhm.
And so I've been in a position to where my discernment was clouded by my own desire for someone to be somebody else other than who they really were.
Mm. It's so
Okay.
hard to do this, though. I mean, that's the thing. I think that's where you're really going to enlighten people, is that you have such a deep understanding of that. And I think that that's part of what's been so hard for you, is that it's such a core philosophy. And to actually think about putting it into words is very challenging when it's your
Yeah.
core philosophy, because when you embody it, it's very difficult to see. It's like for you and I being parents of children, and maybe one of your children is like you. Mine aren't. My son Will, who died, was more like me in some ways, but the other two, one of them isn't exactly very much like me, so they resent the fire. So we will have people that resent us, and I think that's an important place where you'll have some
The
insight on people too.
Yes, and you bring that up because I know exactly what I would say to that, because the fire in us is causes resentment because we have an undesired effect of making people realize they could do what we do, and what they fail to realize is that they can. That's what we're here for.
And do you believe that they really can?
I believe that somebody can, if they will do the work.
Right, if
But
they'll sacrifice. Yeah.
some people simply don't want to do because change is hard. It
Yeah.
is hard to do. You have to want more. You have to want the change more than you want the comfort of staying where you're at.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree
Okay.
more. All right, let's
Okay,
get
cool.
after it. All right, here we go.
Okay.
So I just say, hey, Kate McKay, welcome back to another episode of Master Your Life. I am super excited to introduce my special guest, Andrea Leigh. Andrea, welcome to the show. And welcome. And I'm going to be like, yeah, I usually do the intro, but I'm going to let Andrea take it away, just like that, something like that. Okay?
All right.
Let's have some fun. I think we're good. I think we're good. Hello, I am Kate McKay, and welcome back to another episode of Master Your Life, a show dedicated to sharing stories of personal transformation, growth, and grit. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing a dear friend and colleague, Andrea Leigh. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for having me. It's just been such a joy. And since we met several months back, and we've just, it's just wonderful being your friend.
I know. It's really great to have a sister from another mister, because there's certain people in life that you meet, and it's you be able to be a powerful mirror for that person and vice versa. And Andrew, you've been that person. I usually have a bio, and I'm going to let you, if you don't mind, let me have you introduce yourself to the viewers and listeners. Who is Andrea Leigh?
Andrea Leigh is one complex lady. I am a speaker, author, coach. I speak on having reaction and responses, and how we might ought to consider responding and accepting more than reaction and dividing in fear over our differences. The culture puts us in a divisive sort of way, and it's on purpose. But I have such a great story. I've written a book about it. It'll be out next month. It's called Do You Still Like Football? We'll hold that reason why in suspense. And I coach, and I am known as a change catalyst. And people say, what the hell is that? A change catalyst is somebody that helps people make changes that they can't otherwise make on their own. And I've made changes in my life. I was 30 years in pharma. And during that time, I was a triathlete. I got into ranching, sustainable agriculture design, raising cattle without experience. It's been a hell of a ride. And speaking of riding, I'll make this quick. I was a Harley riding, cattle ranching guy. And I am now this rock star female fashionista, living the best life, meeting wonderful people and associating into people that I aspire to be like. And it's been a journey, and I like helping people have new experiences like I've had. So there you have it. How's that for a bio?
That's a pretty much hot. That's hot. She's coming
It's
in
a hot
hot.
one. Yeah.
So, when you were first talking, I heard something different. And, we've had many deep conversations, but somehow, some way, it came across to me as a mystical understanding of who you are and your purpose here. And could you tell me a little bit more about your mystical or spiritual psychological self? I'm very curious about that.
Well, I believe we've got three portions of ourself. I believe we have our thinking brain. I think we have our body that's in tune with the environment. And I think we have a higher self. And I think that higher self is the spiritual version, that the spiritual part of ourself. You hear the phrase that we're not beings, that beings having a spiritual experience. I think that it's really the case that we really are spiritual beings having a physical experience. And so what I've really tried to do is be in tune with what my higher self wants, that little voice in the back of my head, because I truly believe that it knows why I'm here. And if I will listen to that, and it's hard to fight through physical pain to listen to it. And it's hard to fight through the ego. The ego is a brain driven thing, personality driven, that those two things cloud what your higher self wants, and it's out of preservation. So we have to struggle to find out that. So that's my spiritual thing. As far as I live with meaning and purpose and wanting to find that all the time. I was told from the youngest age that I had a purpose from my mother, and it was serious. It wasn't just something she said, oh, you have a purpose. It was, there is a purpose for you. There is a plan. And when you grow up as a kid, knowing that there is a plan for you and you believe it, it's massive confident building.
It
And
really
so
is.
I grew up thinking that whenever I desired to do something new, if it was somewhat thought out, that there would be no failure in it because it must be part of the plan. And so I just grew up with this confidence. And if it didn't work out, that's okay. That was part of the plan too. I've never had anything that I've done that I didn't learn from. So I believe that little adage that you hear of, oh, there's just success, there's no failure, there's learning. I think that's true. I think that it's not something we just give lip service to. I think that's really true. And that's all in perspective.
It sure is. So did you feel well loved as a child?
I felt so loved. Yeah.
Mm.
Parents put the wind in my sails at my back, and I felt loved. And so when the people that love you the most and that you love, when they put that confidence in you, it's massively confident building. And I feel so blessed and grateful for that experience. And I know, and I feel that way because I know so many people don't have that. And so I feel blessed for that. And
Right.
so so, yeah, it's
That's
been a
such an
wonderful
important
life.
part. It's such an important part. And I think that that's why I have a deep belief in you, because I feel that you have been well loved. And to think the statistics are really that maybe 90% of all humans have know the experience that you had from two parents. It's pretty magical, and what a blessing, even though obviously life has not been easy for you. But I'm so grateful that you bring the love that was imbued in you and the belief that you were here for purpose. That's pretty magical that you knew this to be true. Your mother was a therapist, right? An
Still is.
analyst, or yeah,
Well,
she's
she's a
still
counselor. She's a
right.
counselor. That would be the best way to say her. She's a counselor and she loves her Jungian psychology. And
Yeah,
so
she
I did
does.
grow up with that, and that is familiar. And that's part of my journey too. That's part of the way I coach people too, is with that in mind that, hey, we have these experiences from the past that cultivate who we are, and we have to discern. We have a lot of belief systems that are based on those experiences of the past. A lot of them are foolish and are nonsensical, and that's another aspect we can talk about. But yeah, that comes natural to us. We're good listeners, and we love people.
And the deep in the depth. I listened to recently, I'm not sure if I shared it with you, Andrea, but I listened to a old video interview of Young, and I so fell in love with him. He was a man ahead of his time, and the calmness, the way he communicated, and yet the directness, the level of honesty that he communicated was very, very inspirational to me for sure. So how do you apply that belief in the archetypes into your work, even in your fashionista world? How does that apply to you building relationship and connection with people with this deep understanding?
Well, I think that people have a self image of themselves, and so much of that self image is based on the role they played in their families. Could be from, and that's typically the family of origin. And we adapt ourselves to fit into a role. And a lot of times, if we can figure out what that role is, or what that role was that developed and helped us develop into the kind of person we are now, we can actually, it helps us understand ourselves. In Jungian psychology, we use the process of individuation. That's becoming a whole and complete person. And to do that, you have to have a grasp of your belief system, where it comes from, the role you had. And it also, funny enough, when I talk about it, we all have this masculine and feminine energy. And we want to balance those with each other. And it's not in a gender identity type way. This is a energy that we all have in ourselves. And so it's a really interesting aspect to want to individuate or become whole and complete. Most people want to do that. And most people are struggling to do that subconsciously if they don't recognize it outwardly.
Right. And you see that as your superpower in a way, to be able to know that people are struggling with that self-image. So how does that apply to your all of your work? So you were 30 years in pharmacology and in farm
Yeah,
sales.
big pharma.
Yeah,
Yeah,
big
I
farm.
did. I had a number of different roles in pharma. I started in a very pharmacy driven, consumer oriented approach, to where I moved up through the ranks over 30 years to, being highly specialized in a number of different therapeutic areas, in most of the time spent in cardiology with anticoagulation or diabetes, metabolism, things like that. I sold 27 different compounds. What my success was, a very relationship oriented success. And that meant human connection. And that meant helping people, helping to know what was important to the decision makers that I visited with on a very regular basis. So it was important that I had credibility. I wasn't a salesmanish, if you say, that I very much answered questions that I could as a point person for the medications that I represented to help people. I was very fortunate and very blessed to have represented medications I'm extremely proud of, that helped people over that time period. And then as I moved in from, what was really interesting is when I moved from pharma to fashion, it still was about the customer. And what I realized there is the self-image that we have as when we look into the mirror. So much of that can be based on our physical appearance and not knowing how to wear what we want to wear, to convey what we want to convey. A lot of times we just simply don't have the understanding of wearing things in a way that convey what we want to project to the world, what we see on the inside. And simply a lot of it is just a lack of understanding. It's not really shallow. It's just that we are misinformed on what is best for us to do. And what I love about it so much is if I can put a woman in front of a mirror and say, hey, do this just a little bit, do this just a little bit. You watch and just change right there in front of you to realize, oh my gosh, I was doing the wrong thing. And this is, I understand what you're talking about now. It's always kind of like that old show that was What Not to Wear. I tell people all the time, that's what I do. That's what I do. I'll help show you what not to wear or what to wear and how to wear it and what a big difference it will make.
Well, I love that you just mentioned something very interesting to me, which is basically what you do is you help people shift perspective.
It's a shift perspective of, it's really good too. And styling is just a little tiny part of what I do because it fills my cup so much for everything else I've got to do. So much of what we perceive is we're simply wrong about. We stand and if you're a woman wondering how you look, you stand in front of a mirror, you look at yourself and you just say, I don't see it. Well, maybe the reason you don't see it is it's not the dress you're in. Maybe you're not made. Maybe you don't have your bling on. Maybe you're not wearing the right shoes. Maybe you're not wearing the right this. And so a lot of times we look at ourselves like we're the issue when the package isn't complete and you're looking in the mirror. Also, we look at ourselves in the mirror and no one else looks at us that way. We're in movement all the time. People see us in movement. People are talking to us. We're just being ourselves. And yet we stand in front of a mirror, standing still, really looking ourselves over. And that's just not how real life is. We spend too much time thinking about what other people think, and they simply aren't thinking about us.
That's a big part of your platform, isn't it?
Really big.
Yeah. And why is that?
Well, when I realized that people weren't thinking about me, when I really stepped back and got an objective look, what I realized is that when I started to speak 20 years ago in pharma world at meetings and things like that, what I realized is, well, these people are just like me. Half of them aren't paying attention and the other third are paying on their phones and some are just glad it's me, not them.
Yes.
I realized they weren't thinking about me and with the job I was doing. As a public speaker, I realized that real quick that certain people were going to like me right off the bat. Certain people were going to not like me right off the bat. And it was up to me to just sell the rest of them on what I was saying and not really about me. It really is so much of our energy is spent wondering what other people think about us. And honestly, the culture is so self-absorbed, and this isn't a bad thing necessarily, but they're so self-absorbed into their own lives that they don't have time to worry about us. And that should comfort people really, because they're not thinking about us. And if they're not thinking about you, Kate, and they're indifferent to you and you realize it, you know what it does? It frees you up to be you.
Really? It's so true. And I used to say that to my kids when they were little, and I didn't want to be like rude, but I would just say to them, it's like, you guys, no one's thinking about you. It's like, no one's going to think about you more than me. And I think that I think it came across a little bit like if people heard me talking to my kids like that, they'd be like, God, that's rude because they're so important. But I never wanted my kids to feel that, not that they weren't important, like clearly they're important to me, but in the scheme of things, it's like, don't overestimate how the world thinks of you. In other words, think more of yourself and knowing that their deepest love is going to come from me. And I remember telling them too, this similar to what you were saying about how well loved you were and are, is that there are people in the world that don't experience that. And, you bring the love to the people, but make sure that you partner with someone in the long term that was well loved, because it makes the ride a little bit easier. And I think that's much of the work that we certainly do as coaches and consultants, is helping people fall in love with themselves, whether it's an audience or a coaching relationship. So
Right.
I want to touch in on the concept of suffering, because clearly in all of your success, as an athlete, a triathlete, as a, very successful business human, I mean, extremely successful in every area of your life, you've pursued personal excellence as a path, not excellence for everyone's standard, but for you. What is and how do you describe personal excellence?
Usually I immerse myself in my interests, and I have a good self-awareness that allows me to know what I am capable of if I apply myself in it. And a lot of those things may be, we all have our special talents. And so in pharma world, I knew that if I applied myself in my knowledge and my ability to connect with my clients who were relying on me, who might call me from the emergency room on a Friday night, I knew that if I did my work, I would excel. And that would be excel at the highest levels. I knew when it came to something like triathlon, as an amateur triathlete, I knew what I was capable of if I trained. And so I had high expectations of myself. I wasn't competing for the Olympics or world championships. I was competing against what I knew my high point of capability was. And so when I achieved those standards, it just gave me so much confidence that if I applied myself, I would learn from it. I took that right into cattle. I wanted to learn how to raise cattle after designing my own sustainable agriculture property and ranch. And I wanted to do that. I had no experience, but I found someone that could teach me in a way that would give me amazing experience and success in a different method of ranching than what was normal in the state of Oklahoma or Texas. And so that it comes from having good self-awareness of where are my gifts, where are my strengths, and how can I focus with good systems and processes in place to be the best version of myself. It's the best version of myself. It's just simply that. It's not the best football player, not the best triathlete, not the best pharma rep, even though I was really good at that. I'm a fantastic stylist. That fills my cup. These are things I love, and then these are things that were my vocation that I excelled at. So it's really interesting, the standards we set for ourselves. It's also important to have realistic standards. It's great to have big goals, but even Michael Jordan didn't win 18 championships in a row. He lost some games and missed some game-winning shots. Just have realistic standards and know that your capability, and push yourself, be disciplined. There's a difference between being motivated and disciplined. And we can be motivated, but unless you have discipline, you're not going to achieve your goals.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And how do you measure success personally?
That's a really good question. When you're in something like when you're in the corporate world, you have to, sometimes it's really interesting. That's a great question, because success, when there's like in big pharma and you're in sales, a lot of the sales, you can have great sales in, let's say, 1 year. The next year, you have new goals that are built for you based on the previous year's sales. But there may be things that happen that are out of your control, and you have to adjust for those. But if you're doing the work that you need to do with your systems and processes, you have to understand that there's wins and losses. And much like I said just a second ago with the athletes, not Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, the Steelers, the Cowboys, they don't win every year. You just want to have some success in going for your goals. For me personally, I just wanted to be able to say yes to new experiences. That was my thing. Say yes to new experiences and then apply myself to them so that I actually learned from them. One of the things I always say is the meaning and purpose of life is found in the experience of it. You have to say yes to new experiences to find your meaning and purpose. And if you're going to go
Mm.
into those new experiences, you might as well apply yourself as best as possible to
Yeah,
see what
all
you're going to get
pieces of
from
you.
it. No one
So I
says you
love
have to stay.
I love this. I think this is something to explore more, this whole concept of measuring success. And what I heard was that you measure success in many ways, it's the progression of how success grows. But you also said it's the, and this is sort of me hemming it out, the application of learned principles is what I wrote, because it's the more you're applying yourself and meeting the challenges, you're applying principles that you've developed. So almost like measuring success is repeated application and development of learned principles, your own principles.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm going to give you a couple of examples.
Good.
So in fashion world, I had this principle that it was the customer first. No matter what, the customer came first. And if you would take care of the customer, they would take care of you. And so I applied that better than anybody else. And it showed it. And you have to trust in your gut that at the end of the day, you're doing exactly what you need to do on a personal level with your principles. But you're also, when you're working for someone else at the corporate level, you also have to know in your heart that you are fulfilling the mission, the vision, and the values that that company has by applying the principles to get what you're being paid to do. And with me, it was customer first, because that's going to deliver what the company wants delivered, which at the end of the day is higher volume and sales. And so with the triathlon, the principles were you have to apply yourself so that you grow from being uncomfortable. And that comes from doing more mileage, doing more laps, running more footsteps. And so when you do those and you exceed those things that you set out for, you're going to have success. You also have to realize that there are going to be things out of your control. What happens to the economy? What happens in our with the economy rapidly changing? How does that affect sales? Then it becomes a relative playing field with other people in the industry. With triathlon, what happens if you've done your best and you've had a mechanical failure, or the weather's wrong? Or like me, what if you just simply have a training accident that puts you out of commission for a year?
Right. Oof, that's hard. I love this. So you said it's number one is fulfilling the mission and values, whether that's your personal mission or values of the companies, and then applying the principles from that.
I think everybody has to have a clear mission, vision, and values for themselves or somebody, or if they're working for somebody else, it better be clear. And then the principles of how your own personal principles of how you're going to achieve that, you have to have in place. And I have found that sometimes, depending on the field sometimes I need help developing my systems and processes to help me get to somewhere where I'm unfamiliar with, or I'm uncomfortable. And sometimes when you're in a new place, you're just simply uncomfortable. And you have to be comfortable in new places. So
that's so true. This is like dropping some bombs here. So I can't go without talking about your a big transition for you. Even though in some ways it's like the icing on the cake of who you are. It's almost like a weird thing for me because I know you so well to talk about. But you already mentioned it, that you were birthed as a man and now
yeah,
you are a woman.
yeah.
And you are absolutely stunningly gorgeous. I just adore you inside and out. And I mean that fully. Tell me about how this decision aligned in this mission, values, principle, thesis of yours that is so your marching order. You are a woman of principle like no one I know. And I'm so grateful that we've touched on this particular topic. But how does it apply to your courageous, I'm going to say courageous decision to be who you are fully?
Well, it's such a good question. It's that um, it's such a good question because who I who I am is that higher self voice on the inside. It's not my identity. I just really wanted my outward appearance to be, I wanted there to be congruency with the way I felt on the inside and the way I was on the outside. I just wanted some congruence there. And so let me tell you a small story. When I told my dad's a former football player, baseball player, Navy airman, flew in Korea, was a sub hunter, very masculine. And I was too. Harley riding, cattle ranching, gun carrying guy. And when I said, Dad, I think there's something else for me, he looked at me and he looked down really for a long time. And I was wondering, how is he going to respond or react? And he finally looked up and he asked me a really important question. And he said, you still like football? and, I, and I was like, yeah, I still like football. And what was so cool is that point, that was the heart. I knew my transition was behind me because the dude, my dad, went right to the core and was like, the core of who I was is what he wanted to know wasn't changing. It wasn't my identity. And I realized then that it was all going to be okay. And then it was those other things we talked about. My clients responded, my colleagues responded, my customers responded. And sometimes it was simply with indifference. And that's okay. Because when you realize people are indifferent to you, that's not a bad thing. That allows you to be the best version of yourself because you're no longer worried about what other people think and how freeing that is. So there you have it.
So you're using indifference to your advantage.
I think people should use indifference to their
It's so
advantage because
weird.
it is very weird. But what it does is it reinforces it is a fact. Most people aren't thinking about you. And when you realize that, it's constant reinforcement that most people aren't thinking about you. They're indifferent to me. And when you see it play out, that's okay. That's your sign to go be yourself. Remember, indifference and acceptance doesn't mean agreement. It
True.
just means you're just moving forward. You're just moving forward is all that is from every party involved. It's really a good thing. And I do talk about that in my talks. It's a wonderful talk I give. And my Q&As, because I am open and totally blow apart the stereotype, my Q&As go twice as long as the talk, and it's pretty fun. It is really fun. I have a great response from the audience, and we have a lot of it's a good time. There's a lot of laughter and stuff like that just because of my perspective.
Right.
So
Well, it's almost like this high frequency, intellectual, conceptual, theoretical knowingness that surpasses most people's understanding, that gets jundled and mixed up in this, I identify as a man or a woman. Like, but really the foundation for you is mission, vision, principle. And then the identity is just sort of like out here.
Oh yeah, it's that. Well, you just realize that where we get all confused is in this topic is that we have biology, and I really don't. I just really don't have much room for disagreement on this. Biology is what you're told what mom is told when you're born. You have a boy or you have a girl, and then gender identity anymore. We just have to realize in this day and age that it runs on a spectrum. It doesn't fit into the neat little category of male and female all the time. And if you don't believe that, you're not going to the mall or hanging out watching people very much because it just doesn't. And that's okay. And once again, I go back, it's okay. Most people are indifferent to that. And if you don't notice it, you're probably indifferent. And that's cool. So
Right.
yeah, it's that we are just free to be ourselves. And so I just realized that when that there was something else in store for me. I mean, it's not like it was easy, but
Well, I
the
was
struggle
certainly
the
some stuff.
struggle was realizing, is it right for me? And once I realized it was right for me, I didn't care about what other people thought because I'd already come to that understanding. When I realized it was right for me, then it was all good.
Right. And then going through that whole you had already made the decision. I have a question for you. I talked to, I have of course, I have a few like trans clients and how they describe themselves as such. And I said, well, what were you like your birth name? And he goes, people who are trans that's their dead version. That's their
Yeah.
dead name. I go, that's depressing. Your dead name? Like,
Yeah.
can you come up with something a little more positive? It's like dead. Like, what's your take on that?
Well, my take is, and it's really interesting. Great question, Kate. Because you know what? I don't think I've, hey, here's a Jungian concept for you. I don't think I fully or individuated, became a complete person until I fully owned the past. How do you like that? So I was David Andrew, and David Andrew was the cattle ranching, Harley riding, football player, triathlete, aggressive, bold, confident. And guess what? Those aren't necessarily masculine. Andrea can be those too. And so when I realized that it's never was my masculinity, I was masculine guy. My masculinity was never toxic. It was just me. And I could be all those things and be a pretty girl. And so, of course, I had a skilled surgeon help me.
Right, exactly. Can you describe that story about how you chose the surgeon? Because you had a very clear, you didn't want to do, and goes back to personal excellence. You weren't interested in being not an absolutely stunning woman, right?
It wasn't criteria, but I did not want to be a guy I didn't want to be a woman that was a guy dressed up. However, I need to say that I really just didn't want to be, hey, there's a guy dressed like a woman. That wasn't for me.
But you were
And so,
committed to that personal
yeah,
excellence of you.
yeah, I think so. And I'm really thoughtful and grateful for that I was able to bring that fruition with some help of a couple of wonderful surgeons that helped me do that. I had no interest in in identifying as. That wasn't really for me. For me to have the experience I wanted in my life, I needed to be identified as a woman so that I could have the experience I wanted. So when I was seeking, I talked to two different surgeons. When I was seeking information and I had come to the decision point, I had said to my doctor, I said, listen, I'm a fixture here in the medical community. I've been here for 20 years. I'm going to be here longer. And people are going to see your work walk through their doors every day. These are people that are your colleagues because we're in medical. What do you think about that? And she looked at me and she said, bring it. I'll make you pretty. Just like that. And the confidence that she had been imbued with spoke to me so quick that being who I was, and this was Harley riding cattle rancher talking to her, not Andrea. I looked at her and said, done. Let's pick some boobs.
But this is just the best. I mean, it's so beautiful, the honesty and the truth of
It's the truth.
how things can be so beautiful in its concrete abstractness of
Kate, I'm going to tell you
humanness.
something that just made me think right now. A writing coach I had, his name is Mark Matusik, and he said that when we tell ourselves the truth, our stories will change. And that when our stories change, our lives will be transformed. And if we will tell ourselves the truth, how wonderful of an experience we can have. And I've had some great experiences because I don't lie to myself or as little as possible.
right, as subjectively as we can in our inside of our skin
That's
suit.
right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the evolution of the human as and telling the truth and seeing the truth is the evolutionary path of wisdom. So it's
Yes,
just
it is.
we're just living into that. So in your coaching programs, you have a few pillars that are super important. And obviously we touched on the personal excellence, and thank you so much for all of that you shared, particularly around that mission, vision, and principle, and how the identity of our future identity and our present and current identity relates to that. Well, how would you describe this one concept, which I believe you embody, which is discernment? Why is discernment an important process in this truth telling?
Well, I think that with good discernment, when it comes into human connection, you see past the surface. You
Hmm.
can, when you're talking to a client, or just a fellow human you're connecting with, and you're on a subject matter, and they tell you, why they think the ways they think. A lot of times, there's more to go into that. You find out deeper why. And so when you find out the deeper why and ask the deeper questions that clarify, so you can be a good listener and help people understand, help you understand where someone else is coming from. It helps you be a better friend. It helps you be a better coach. It helps you be a better salesperson, if that's what you do. It will help you in those. In your personal relationships, discernment is so important, because so many times we project onto people. We project on people who we want them to be. And when they simply are themselves and don't meet our projection anymore, what it can be so disappointing to ourselves. And it's on us. It's not on them. They weren't being anybody different than who they are. It's just that we lacked in discernment and wanting to see the real person in whom we're connecting with versus who they really were. And so much of that is projecting. It's also projection. Remember, projection is from inside of ourself. We project, so that's Jungian again. There comes Carl.
Yeah.
Is that we project our shadows onto other people. Shadows is simply just saying, typically, the things that we suppress or the things that we don't like about ourselves, we kind of project onto other people. And so, or the things that maybe even we want for ourselves, we'll project onto other people. And when they don't fulfill those, or they aren't those, it's kind of disconcerting. It discombobulates us a little bit. And so that's why discernment is so important. And listen, if you're not a discerning person, and that's okay, those are strengths in people and weaknesses in people. It's really great to have someone around you that is. And man, talk about discernment. I'm married to somebody that's got amazing discernment,
Love
such on a
that.
high spiritual level, that I just love being that she's very helpful to me in, in helping me to connect with others, just because she's so good at it and helping me see things in people I just don't see right away. And
Wow.
I'm a high discerning
You
person.
are very high.
Yeah. And
And
when
it's
you've
so
got someone
interesting.
around you.
Yeah, that she's in a different kind of discernment. So,
Yeah.
how would you describe discernment from the internal process of being able to envision yourself in a holistic way, and particularly when you're thinking about getting greater clarity, let's just say from a coaching perspective, and helping someone get a greater understand of what their mission, vision, and purpose is in life, based on the philosophy of looking inward and using a higher level of discernment, which is a psychological, obviously, and spiritual principle.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that, when let's say we're talking specifically about me, Andrea, right now. Well, here I come, decades in corporate, where lots of stuff is done for me, and I'm a talented person. And I come from one industry to another industry. Then now I'm working for myself, this speaker, author, coach, stylist, as a stylist, because I'm talented in it and I love it. These different things. And what I realized is that surrounding a lot of times in these different areas of specialization, we surround ourselves with people that are in their zone of genius. And what I realize is that you have to have a great understanding of yourself and be discerning, trust yourself, and know that while they may sound all disconnected in different parts, that they're all really one. And that's where your holistic comes in. It's holistic because I make my speaking and my book and my coaching and my styling, when you really look at it, it's all encompassing on the same things that I believe in. If you're not discerning, you may listen to people that help you in those different areas who may have your best interest in mind, but only from their perspective. And so from an individual like me or a high performer like you and me, we have to be careful and be the boss. I've said this before, but I didn't really know how deep it was. I'm the boss of me, and that
Yes.
I'm the one that decides what my mission and vision and values is. And it's up to me as the boss of me that that's clearly communicated to the others. And so I have to be discerning in how to connect with them as they give me coaching and give me advice and do the things and the consulting counseling that I'm using them for. I didn't start
Right.
out a great speaker. I didn't start out a great entrepreneur. I didn't start out a great, well, I was a good stylist, but I didn't start out a great author. But all of those things, you have to be the boss of you. It takes discernment, and it takes being a leader of the people you put around you.
So good. Oh my gosh, that's so helpful. So great. Mm. So is there anything, I would love it if you would just share a little bit about this topic, because as much as you have such a positive outlook on life, that you've had experienced suffering, and that I think part of your magic is your ability to transmute some suffering into something else. And I would love to, if you would share an example of a time where you did in fact suffer and how you led your way through that.
The triathlon was physical suffering, not the triathlon itself. It was the injury I sustained where I couldn't walk, excuse me. I couldn't walk for a couple of months. And so the pain of going through the training for triathlon was really nothing compared to the physical pain I had dealt with prior to returning to training.
Mm.
I suffered through a traumatic eye incident of my daughter's. My daughter was the one in a million playing in the house, fell over into the coffee table and blew her eye apart. She hit the corner of the coffee table. In dealing with that accident and seeing how a 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old daughter dealt with the pain of a blown up eye, and then seeing skilled surgeons knit it back together, gives you perspective.
Mm.
It gives you perspective on what you are capable of and what other people can endure. And she now sees and saw good enough to pass a driving test with corrective vision with that eye. I've seen miracles happen. I was told it would be a miracle if it happened. That's how unlikely it was. And I've seen doctors break down knowing that they've seen one. We're all weird. We're all every one of us is unique. There is meaning and purpose for us. I also believe that Jesus is exactly who he said he was. I believe that he said many times in scripture, have no fear. I believe that if he knew what he was talking about, he was right, and I believe him. I don't want to get to the other side and say, damn, I wished I would have done that. Damn, that's what that was all about. He must know what he's talking about if he says, have no fear. And so I trust and I live like there's no fear. Doesn't mean I'm not uncomfortable. I'm highly uncomfortable a lot of the time, but I also find comfort that I'm growing because that's where the growth is. And so I'm very secure that this is a blip in eternity and I'm here for a reason. I'm here for my meaning and purpose. I believe that my higher self knows exactly what that is. And that if I will just listen to it, I'll find it. But I need to find it in the meaning and purpose of living my life. If you sit around and wait, you will not find it. You need to find it on the journey. And the journey is yours alone. You came into the journey by yourself. You're going to leave it by yourself. There's no path to follow because it's your trail. You are the one that's going to create it. And I personally believe I want a wide swath behind me so that everybody knows where I've been.
Powerful. Andrea, that's really quite beautiful. And I'm really grateful. I'm nothing further to say to that. And so I just
Well,
want to, yeah, I mean, it's just, you just hammered it. It's just so, so very, very good. So I would love it if you would just share, just what is if you were to have a billboard, because you will have one, what would you want that billboard to say for people to read and understand? If they were, if it was in like Times Square or something, what would you want that billboard to say?
say yes to new experiences, and you'd have a powerful picture of me embodying optimism and positivity, because that's what you'll find. You go for new experiences and you be positive and optimistic about it and look for what you're supposed to learn along the way. And as those new experiences meet you, you think about your response to them. That's
Yeah.
what I'd say.
Yeah. And
Say
it's
yes
almost
to new
like
experiences.
say yes to new. And I love the image of leave a large swath behind you because it's such a beautiful image of like, just like,
Yeah,
because you blew through life and you created a path and it wasn't a small path. And I think if we all lean into that, wow, that is a magnificent image.
it
Andrea,
is a great image. It's
it's
the
such a
image that
good
I
one.
had yeah, it's the image I had as I would take the tractor through the pasture, and I'd be cutting down stuff and you would be blowing through stuff 4 feet tall and behind you would just look beautiful. And you'd see some rocky shit behind you in that path. But guess what? It was clear where you'd been.
It's clear where you have been. Andrea, thank you for sharing the grace and beauty and grit and determination and joy to which you are. I'm so grateful to know you and I appreciate you.
Well, I am so grateful to know you. You've just become such a dear friend to me, and I love you very much. And I'm so glad we connected. And it's a pleasure to be here. And it's nice for the world to just get to for me to share a little bit of myself with the world.
Yeah, and a large swath of you. Yes, amen. All right. Well, thank you, viewers and listeners. I will absolutely be sharing Andrea's contact information in the show notes. We'll just make sure to be grabbing a copy of her book, which we'll also be sharing. So stay tuned for the link in the show notes for that, as well as you can follow Andrea on social media, and that will also be in the show notes. So if you want to hire Andrea for a coach, consulting, or a speaker, you know where to find her, and that will be in the notes as well. And I am thankful for this time together. Thank you again, Andrea.
Thanks, Kate.
Be blessed, everyone, and take good care.